everyone, and welcome back to Clocking In, Labor and Employment News for Government Contractors. I'm Nicole Atala, and I'm here with my lovely co-host, Sarah Nash, also a partner in our Labor and Employment Practice Group. And today we are going to talk about the trend of second chance initiatives and how that lines up with some legislative initiatives to provide more opportunities for folks with criminal records to enter into the workforce. And so with that, Sarah, what's new in this field and what should our clients and resource partners know about these types of initiatives and how they link in with considerations for federal contractors?
For sure. So as Nicole mentioned, there are a lot of second chance initiatives out there. That's sort of what spurred today's topic in our podcast. Nicole came across a JP Morgan Chase initiative to help individuals with criminal background or other tarnished records, sort of help get them reintegrated into the workforce. And I guess they had an art installation and a whole marketing sort of endeavor around this initiative. The idea being that it kind of ties in with ban the box requirements. Just because someone has broken the law at some point in their life does not mean that they are forever going to be breaking laws or should forever be excluded from the workforce. And this is very consistent with what we've been seeing across states and also in the federal contracting world, where there have been ban the box rules that limit the extent to which contractors or companies can rely on criminal histories. And generally those ban the box initiatives apply only in certain circumstances, right? So it's not entirely throughout the employment. It's specifically in that pre-offer stage where you have not yet interviewed the employee, you haven't yet brought them in the door. In those instances, so for example, if you have a application out there that says, have you been convicted of a felony? Probably a good opportunity to look at that a little bit more carefully and maybe take it out of your application process. Things like that are frowned upon where there's a ban the box requirement. And that is, most states now have implemented this. I don't know how many, but it's fairly, I think it is the rule now more so than the exception, almost all. And NDAA also recently, what was it, 2019?
Yeah, a couple years ago.
I feel like it was a few years ago. They also implemented this requirement. We're up to date, labor and employment news. It's been around for a minute, right? And so government contractors are similarly now, regardless of the states where you're operating, not permitted to weigh that type of information prior to issuing an offer. You can still run background checks. You can still be reliant on government background checks, but this is supposed to discourage sort of discrimination against individuals who might not be given an opportunity because of that background. It's also important to note, though, that outside of ban the box, there are also some EEO considerations when it comes to how you process those background checks. So if folks are familiar, the Fair Credit Reporting Act places restrictions on companies' abilities to run a third-party background check. So if you do elicit a third party to run that criminal background check or credit check, there are obligations that you provide certain notices to your employees about that process. And on the flip side, that you provide them with a pre-adverse notice and an adverse notice of the decision not to continue with their employment. All of that gets wrapped into this question of, did you have a reasonable sort of basis for not extending an offer or not finalizing an offer with someone because you find criminal history in their background? And that gets to be, I hate these questions. They're not black and white. It's really one of those, like, how long ago was it? What was the nature of the crime? Was it related to the work that they'll be performing? All of these really fuzzy issues that don't always have a clear answer, but it is important that you think through them. And so that's just I know that you asked for a quick summary, but that's sort of a broad sweeping scope of what we're looking at in terms of sort of how you evaluate criminal history in your employment process.
Okay, so 2 quick questions, rapid fire. Isn't it impermissible to hire someone with a felony on a federal government contract?
We should have like an illustration that pops up like Mythbusters. No, it's not. I mean, I think it's a common misperception and it is a myth out there that, and to be clear, there are heightened obligations when it comes to supporting government work. There is this expectation on, the federal side and the government contracting side that individuals are held to higher standards. But there is also this idea that someone's errors or mistakes in some instances in the past shouldn't necessarily determine their future forever. And there is no prohibition, for example, on hiring someone with a felony just because they're part of a federal contract. I will note that there are a lot of federal contractors out there, like everyone knows, that require government clearances. And so in that instance, there are some additional sort of considerations in evaluating someone who might have a criminal record. It's also a good opportunity to point out that there are a lot of states out there that prohibit discrimination on the basis of an arrest, which is distinguishable from a conviction. And it's sort of a state-by-state basis, but it is important to have a clear understanding of what the actual, like, was this individual actually convicted? Because if they weren't, there is even more considerations that you have to look at.
Right. And just because, there's some like public trust requirement doesn't mean they won't get through that public trust process, right? And I always sense frustration from clients when they're like, yeah, but they need a public trust. There's no way they'll get a public trust. I'm like, it's a marijuana conviction from 15 years ago. They very well might get through a public trust, right? A public trust isn't actually a security clearance, and that's not for us to decide. That's for the agency doing that clearance process to decide, right? So our job is to take a look at, does the federal contract actually explicitly prohibit this? Most of the time not. And two, like Sarah pointed out earlier, are we talking about a fraud conviction from 4 or 5 years ago? That's a lot different than a misdemeanor marijuana conviction, or even a felony marijuana conviction from 15, 20 years ago. So it's not always easy to give clients the right answer, right? But those are the kinds of things that we talk through with them.
A classic lawyer answer, right? It depends. But to your point about marijuana, there are a lot of changes. I can't remember if we've done a podcast on it. If we haven't, we should. There are a lot of changes in the marijuana landscape. For example, I believe the federal government is looking at changing the class of substance. So like even more is on the horizon, but there are a lot of states out there that already have limited the extent to which you can consider marijuana use for employment decisions. And so just be mindful that depending on the state where your employees are, because again, that's the relevant state law, there could be some limitations on how you're looking at that type of information.
And with that, we must leave you. No, we'll see you. Thanks for joining us. We will see you next time.
It was a pleasure.